In this video, we're going to connect Websphere Application Server to Microsoft's Active Directory using LDAP. The purpose here is that when I click on Login, the username and the password currently come from inside Websphere. I'll show you what I mean. But once this is complete, the login the username and password, when you click Login, will come from Microsoft Active Directory. First click on Login, then go to Users and Groups, click Manage Users, and this is a list of all of the users that you have access to, usernames and passwords. If you click on one of the users, you get information about the user and you can adjust a password. How did that get set up? Well, if you reduce users and groups and then you go to security, click on Global Security, go to Federated Repositories, click Configure. I'm going to maximize this window and you'll see that we have default WIM file-based realm set up. For details on that, look at this video. And if you click on Manage Repositories, you'll see Internal File Repository, which looks like this. So in other words, your default WIM file-based realm is using this internal file repository to grab its usernames and its passwords. Now, once we're done, the repository identifier will say LDAP.AD instead of internal file repository. Okay, so let's get started. First, let's set up Active Directory. First, click the Server Manager, go to Manage Add Roles and Features, click Next, Next, select your server, click Next. I'm going to assume that this is the first Active Directory server in your environment, so I'm going to click Active Directory Domain Services, click Add Features, then go to DNS Server because Active Directory relies on DNS, requires it. Click Next, and Next again, and Next again, and Install. Now click Promote the server to a domain controller. Again, I'm assuming this is your first Active Directory server, so click here. Now enter a domain name. I'm using ibm.com. But before you click on Next, open up PowerShell. Type in ncpa.cpl. Right-click on your network card, go to Properties. Double-click on TCP/IP4. Now be sure that the IP address that you're using for this server matches the DNS server for the preferred DNS server listed here. And in our case, I'm going to blank out all the other DNS servers. Then close all of those windows and click on Next. Enter these values and some password, click Next. You can ignore this message because our DNS server isn't set up yet. Click Next, click Next, click Next, click Next. Review the screen. You can ignore these messages, click Install. The machine will now reboot. Now open PowerShell. Type in dsa.msc, which stands for Directory Services Agent.Microsoft Console, and hit Enter. That will bring up this window here, which I'll snap to the right. And I will minimize this window. Now expand out your domain, go down to Users, and you should see a list of users here. You'll also see a list of security groups in here. Now go back to PowerShell, type in DNSMGMT, DNSManagement.Microsoft Console, and hit Enter. You should see entries in your forward lookup zones. Now click on Reverse Lookup Zone, New Zone, and click Next. And click on Next, and Next, and Next. I'm using Class C subnetting, so I'll enter the first three separated portions of the network ID. That automatically populates this portion down below. Click on Next, and Finish. Now, make sure your DNS suffixes, if you have more than one like I do, make sure that your ibm.com is at the top using this arrow, or delete the other two. And also be sure your DNS suffix for this connection matches your new domain, ibm.com in this case. At this point, we have a basic Active Directory installation ready to go. But because WAS runs in Linux, we need to be sure that we have Linux connectivity over to our Active Directory installation. So open up a Linux machine. You can see I'm running this. Now enter this command here, which will install OpenLDAP, the client side, and click yes to any of these prompts. And make sure it says complete. I'm going to maximize this window, then enter this command. Here is a list of the options along with the description. So you can see that H is for hostname, D is for bind, that's your login username, and W is for the password. Here we're doing in plain text, but if you do a capital W, you could enter it at the prompt. This CN equals asterisk corresponds to the filter, and it really is what you're searching for. So if I run that, you'll get these responses. So I'll just scroll through some of that content so you can see there's clearly a lot more here than we need. So one way to change that would be to type in cn equals and do an asterisk, IBM asterisk, which will do a wildcard search before and after the IBM text. And the results are here. Notice we did a search on CN, our common name, and that's why we're getting the result that we did. And if you open up Active Directory Users and Groups and right-click IBM Admin, go to Properties, these are the properties, or the tabs anyway, that you would get. But notice none of these really correspond to what we're seeing on the left. You can use built-in Microsoft tools to get similar output to what you're seeing here. Go to PowerShell, open LDP, go to Connection, Connect, click OK after you type in your values there, and then notice you'll get this output. To do a search, click Browse, go to Search. This is essentially the same search we just ran in Linux, but you need to select Subtree, then click Run. If you don't get any output, that's because you first need to bind. So click Close, then go to Connection and Bind. And then I'm logging in as this current user. Any user should work. And now go back to Browse, Search, and rerun your search. And this time we see the same or similar output that we got in Linux using ldapsearch. Alternatively, you can minimize this and type in ADSIEdit and right-click and select Connect to. Leave the defaults, click OK. Click here and then here. And I'll maximize this window. And here you can see more information like you would sort of expect from ldapsearch, so CN equals and so forth. And you can expand this and double-click on, say, users, and you get the idea CN equals and DC equals to get your distinguished names. The other nice feature here is that you can right-click on an entry and go to Properties and then see all the attributes and their values, including CN. And of course, it's ADSIEdit, which means you get an edit button if you needed it. Now, this command actually assumes you meant this, which is to enter port 389. But that's a problem because anyone using LDAPsearch or any Linux-based tools like LDAPsearch, OpenLDAP tools, would use port 389 where none of this information is encrypted, so anyone watching the line could sniff out this password and the username. So what we really want to do is enable SSL or TLS, and specifically TLS, using -Z. Historically, that was done with LDAPS, and actually even today you can use LDAPS with TLS 1.2. But the problem is that LDAPS has been deprecated, and so now we're supposed to use StartTLS. StartTLS will actually use port 389, but as soon as a connection is made, it will switch over to begin a session using TLS. And to do all of that, you issue a -Z, and to force StartTLS, it would be a -ZZ. But if I try that with either -Z or ZZ, we immediately get an error. And the problem is that Active Directory has not been enabled for SSL or TLS. So to fix that, open up your server manager, go to Manage, Add Roles and Features, Next, 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 and go to Active Directory Certificate Services, click Add Features, go to Next, click Next, and click Next again, click Next, and click Install. Now we need to configure it, click here, change your credentials to make sure that you're the administrator of the entire domain, click Next, and Next, and Next, and Next, and Next. I'll select SHA-256, Next. Now this screen is important, we'll come back to these values later. Click Next, and Next, and Next, and Configure, and Close. Now all that did was create the certificate authority, which is the CA. It doesn't let us connect yet, and you can confirm that if you try this command. And you'll see the same error that we got before. So to fix that, open up PowerShell, type MMC and press Enter. Go to File and click the Add Remove Snap-in. Click on Certificates, then click on Add. Go to Computer Account, Next, Local Computer, Finish, OK. Now expand this. Now expand Trusted Root Certification Authorities, go to Certificates, and notice we have 2 CA certificates here. If you double click on one of the certificates, you get information about it. But another way to get information is to go to PowerShell and enter this command, and you'll see current user, and you can see which directory it's in, if it's in root or CA or remote desktop. or local machine. If it's in my corresponds to personal. The main difference between the two is you have current user and you have local machine. Local machine is what we selected when we went to File and then Add, Remove, Snap-in, and Certificates. But if you wanted to, you could select My User Account, and that would correspond to current user. PowerShell is a much faster way, especially if you need to do searching, to go through all of the certificates instead of clicking in and trying to locate one of the certificates in one of these areas here. Notice too that PowerShell will give you the thumbprint, which is known as a fingerprint in OpenSSL. The difference between a serial number and a thumbprint or fingerprint is listed here, but essentially the thumbprint is a hash computed over the entire certificate, so you would have a unique number there. Now notice that under local machine my, which you can confirm in personal certificates, we have the same certificate listed in both. Back in PowerShell, I'm going to hit dir and I'm going to cd into local machine. Then I'm going to add this select star to the end of the command we ran before, and that will give you all of the properties for the certificates in the local machine. And if you temporarily switch back to the trusted root and you dump out all of the data for these two certificates, wondering why is there a difference between the two, or even is there a difference between the two, why is it listed twice, I copied the text from PowerShell of the first one here and the second one here, and I did a diff on it, and this is a listing of the difference. Really, the only difference is this handle. Okay, so back to personal certificates. This certificate is our certificate authority. It is considered the root, and later we'll see certificates signed by this one coming down here as children. So at this point we have a CA, a certificate authority, which means we have a certificate for the entire domain. We do not, however, have a certificate for this domain controller, the one running our Active Directory. So we need that, and we also need one for anyone authenticating against it. So we need to get to this screen. To do that, right-click, go to All Tasks, Request New Certificate, Next, Next, select these two, and click Enroll. Click Finish. And notice we now have two new certificates, with the difference between these two being their intended purposes and, more specifically, more interestingly, what they're used for. For more details about these, you can open them up, go down to the very bottom, find the thumbprint, grab the last two digits, then go to PowerShell and enter these commands, which will actually search for those last few digits. And there is actually another difference between the two, which is that the subject is empty in the second one and it's filled in the first. And then obviously they have different thumbprints, as you can tell here. Now that we have that figured out, this error message should go away if we reissue the same command. And in fact, we get this message saying that our client here, which is the Linux machine, doesn't trust this certificate. And by this certificate, I mean the thumbprint that identifies the given certificate, which we need to check. Now, notice that LDAPS has been installed because we went through the certificate process. And knowing that, we can use OpenSSL, which is a Linux client, using specifically the s_ client to make a connection at a debug level to the server using port 636, which is LDAPS, to get some certificate information. And we're going to pipe that to X509 where we'll print out the fingerprint. And if I open that up and do a search for finger, you'll see the fingerprint right there. It ends in 0953. And, well, we know which one that is because here it is, 0953. And graphically, it's this one, 0953, and it corresponds to domain controller authentication, which makes sense because this is the certificate we're going to use to authenticate against the domain controller. Now, if I run the same command without the OpenSSL pipe, notice at the very end here that we get unable to verify first certificate, which simply means we don't have a copy of that certificate anywhere on this Linux client. But also, we don't trust its parent. So if you open up the certificate and go to certification path, we haven't told OpenSSL about this root CA. So to fix that, just double click on it, go to details and copy to a file, next. Go to base64 encoded, next. Click browse. I'm going to call mine root CA and click next and finish. Now if I open that up and right click on it, go to edit with Notepad++, then this should look familiar. This is the PEM format, PEM. Microsoft calls it CER, but it's base64 encoded. It's not encrypted, it's encoded. And that's explained to some degree here, especially PEM and CER. Now this format lets you copy and paste two of these certificates in one file, which is what we're going to do, but not in this file. So for now, select all this and copy it. Now switch back to the Linux machine, cd to this directory, type vim or vi and type ADSIEdit, and we'll do a .pem. Now insert and paste the content here, hit escape, shift and Z, shift Z to save it. So now we have the root CA certificate, but we also need this certificate too, which is what we're using to connect to. So run this command, and now scroll up and copy this begin to end part of the certificate, and then go back into this file and paste it. Now press escape and shift Z, and we have saved it. Now, why would we do that? Because if you run this command here, which reruns what we did before, but now looks to see if the certificate has been authenticated, you'll see that it has. And specifically here, verify return code 0. Okay. Now, we did all that because OpenSSL is what StartTLS is going to be using when we're connecting with ldapsearch. Put simply, it's going to help us fix this problem here. How is it going to do that? Well, by doing this. If we open up ldap.conf, which is the client-side configuration for connections over LDAP, you'll see a file that looks like this. And I'm going to paste in some content here. And you can read some comments that I made here about CA cert directory. But the point is that if you give it a CA cert and then you provide these certificates in that format, I'll split the screen so you can see that this is indeed the right file with those same certificates that we looked at before. And then close that. If you do all of that, you'll get a response here correctly. And this time you are using, as it says with ZZ, a connection that is encrypted using StartTLS. And again, just for reference, that's the ZZ here. Okay, so now we need to connect Websphere into Active Directory. So first, I'm going to put a new account called wasmgr in Active Directory. But before I do that, I'm going to right-click, go to New, and create a new organizational unit and call it ICFM for IBM Counter Fraud Management. Now comes the fun part. You need to right-click, go to New, and create a bunch of users and a bunch of groups that are all appropriate for ICFM. So right-click and New and User wasmgr. Be careful with last names because although you can enter them in, you need to have a single wasmgr in one word. If you have two words, you're going to have to type that in the user ID with two separate words, and a space is not a good idea. Ultimately, this is going to match CN. And click on next, and I'm going to make my password never expires depending on whatever you need here. Now in our case, the passwords are listed in this file here. So you can see counterfraud1 will be the password. And click next and finish. Now because we made this ICFM OU, go into ADSIEdit and then click on the root here, your IBM.com, and then look at ICFM and notice what it says under distinguished name. OU equals ICFM, DC equals IBM, and DC equals com. We're going to need that. Armed with that information, log in here as wasmgr. Open up users and groups, go to manage users, and enter all of these into Active Directory. If you get this message while trying to set the password, press Shift, right-click on PowerShell, run as a different user. Log in as a domain admin in my case, which looks like this. Then type gpmc.msc. Then open up the forest, the domains, find your domain, right-click default domain policy, click on edit, then go to computer, policy, Windows, and go down to security, then account policies. Then double-click on password policy. And in my case, I'm going to change this from enabled to disabled, but in your case, you may need to choose something else. Now go back to PowerShell and type gp update for group policy update, and try it again. Okay, so there we have the users. Now let's go to the groups. For the groups, it's the same idea. Right-click and go to New, but this time go to Group. Type in the group name, click OK. Okay, there are all the groups, and I'll sort by the type so you can see the groups and users. Now to see which users are in which groups, press the control button down, click on the group name, and then go to members and enter these by double-clicking on the group. So CF administrators, go to members, and then start adding the people. And you can separate them by a semicolon. You can check names if you want, click OK, and go on to the next one. You'll also need to add these two groups. So once that's done, it should look like this. So now go back to your Red Hat machine, go into this directory, and vim adcerts.pem. Then copy this first certificate, which is the root, and then do a vim ad-root.pem and paste that in here. Then go back into your certs and copy that second one out and do a vim AD-DC for a domain controller and paste that in here. Then do an LL and you should see this. Make sure too that you don't have trailing line breaks there. Then secure copy them over to the analytics machine, which is running your deployment manager for WAS. Then log in as root at analytics. Then change the owner on those files, and then move those files. Then log into your WAS deployment manager, go to security, SSL, key management, key stores and certificates. Then go to cell default trust store. Then click on signer certificates. Then click on add. Make sure they look something like this. Copy that path and paste it in here. I'll put the alias the same as the file there. And click on OK. And do the same with the second file. Issued to is blank. We saw that earlier. The subject was blank. And click on Save. Now go to Security, Global Security. Click on Configure under Federated Repositories. Click on Add Repositories. Then click New Repository and select LDAP repository. Type CFM LDAP. Type in your host name. Type in your distinguished name. And that's for doing bind, which means basically log in. Make sure the bind password is appropriate for that user. Change the port to 636. And because we've changed that port to 636, be sure that you can run this command here, which forces the port to be 636, obviously, but also uses LDAPS, which we're going to use in WAS. And make sure you get a result here. Now go back to WAS and change UID to CN. And now click on Require SSL Communications. And now scroll down and click OK. You should see a screen that looks like this. Click Review. And WIM config will be updated. Click on Synchronize Changes with Nodes and click Save. Make sure this looks good. Now go to Security, Global Security, Configure, then Manage Repositories. Then click on CFM LDAP, go down to Federated Repositories, Entity Types to LDAP Object Classes Mapping. Then click on Group, change it to just Group and click OK. Then click on Person Account, change that to User, click OK. Click on Review. Notice what's going to change. Click here, click Save. Now go to Security, Global Security, Configure. Then go Manage Repositories, select CFM LDAP, go down to Group Attribute Definition. Then Member Attributes. Click on Member, make sure this just says Group. Click on OK. Click on Review, Synchronize, and Save. Now go back to Security, Global Security, Configure. Now click Add Repository. Type in this value here. You can confirm it here. Click on OK. Click on Review and Synchronize and Save. Click on OK, then go down to Additional Properties and select Supported Entity Types. Click on Group. Enter this value, click OK. Then go down to Org Container. Enter that same value. Click on OK. And the same for Person Account. And click on OK. Then click on Review, Synchronize, and Save. Now go back to Security, Global Security, Configure. Now click on this one and then Remove. Click on Review and see which items changed and then click Save. Now in the realm name, copy and paste this value here and then click on OK. And make sure you don't get any errors here and then click on Save. Now stop the WAS server and then start it back up again. It's the deployment manager that we're interested in at this point. Now it's going to ask us to log in here, but at this point this WAS manager's credentials must match this one's. And there we go. We are logged in. But not all of the servers are going to come up correctly. Go ahead and turn on any servers that didn't come up properly, and it should look like this. If your servers refuse to come up correctly, or if the applications do, go to Applications, Websphere Enterprise Applications. Then click on the first application. Then go to Security Role to User Group Mapping. Then go through these one by one. Click on Select for Administrator, go to Map Groups. Click on Search, and then make sure that what you see here is also on the left. And you may need to increase the number of results being displayed here for that. Then go to CF administrators in this case, and then click the right arrow, and then click on OK. Then repeat that for supervisor, and then investigator, and then triage analyst, and so on. Then repeat that for each application as you go down, and then try again to get your application to start up. Usually through all servers tends to be the easiest way.